No single number described the Sun Devils' 2024 season better than the rushing attack led by the People's running back.
You are Locked On Sun Devils, your daily podcast on the Arizona State Sun Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Richie Bradshaw, and I will be your guide for everything Arizona State Sun Devils. Shout out my everydayers who are here every day, and thanks to all of you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back into a very special edition of the Locked On Sun Devils podcast. I have been trying to get to this one for a minute, but we've had way too much breaking news for me to get there. But that's okay. We're finally here to talk about stats of the season. We got to talk about the offensive stats of the year, the defensive stats of the year, both of which define the season before we round out the show with a bunch of stuff. I got season game balls, I got team awards, and the best plays of the year. We got to start with the offensive statistics of the year that defined the Sun Devils. Well, none described the team more than Cam Skattebo. I have three individual performances I want to point out before we talk about team statistics, but it starts with the People's running back. He can run it. He can catch it. He can throw it. He can punt it. And of course, he's your mom's favorite player. 13 games. So he missed a game against UCF, keep in mind. And he still managed to set two program records. The single season rushing yards record. He broke Eno Benjamin's record. 1,711 yards. 1,711 yards in 13 games, which is the same amount of games that Eno played, and he would have had one more opportunity as well to make that number even better. He, of course, missed that, but nonetheless, absolute insanity. 293 carries. So, a pretty average 5.8 yards per carry. Nothing crazy. Almost 6 yards a pop and well over 100 rushing yards per game. 21 rushing touchdowns was also a team best and a program best. In the history of the program, he set the rushing yards record and the rushing touchdowns record. He did a lot in the receiving game. He did a lot in the passing game as well. More on that towards the end of the show. So make sure you stick around for that play. It was nothing short of an amazing season for Cam Skattebo, and he helped out the two other players we're going to talk about. Player number 2, Sam Leavitt. How can we not talk about Sam Leavitt? 13 games, he missed the game against Cincinnati, and yet he still threw 24 touchdown passes, which is a freshman record for ASU. Redshirt or true freshman. He managed 2,808. Let me try that again. 2,885 passing yards, the second most by a freshman behind Jordyn Daniels in 2019. And they played the same amount of games, 13, but there was an opportunity for one more game for Leavitt. He would have absolutely broken that record. Probably would have hit 3,000 passing yards. He also managed to have 443 rushing yards. Get this, that is also a freshman record. He broke Jordyn Daniels' record. Now, granted, if Herm Edwards had pulled his head out of his you-know-what and told Jordyn Daniels, hey, do what you're good at and run the football, that record would probably be unattainable by the freshman. But he managed to beat that record by almost 100 rushing yards, too. Big-time playmaker, Sam Leavitt, this year. Speaking of playmakers, Jordyn Tyson, who missed the last 2 games of the year. So in 12 games, this is what he managed to do. 1,101 yards. It was the Sun Devils' first 1,000-yard season since 2019 when Brandon Ayuk set the record. But this number continues to go further and further and further. With that 1,101 receiving yards, he still finished number 6 number 6 in the nation. It's pretty crazy. If he had managed to play all 14 games, he was averaging 91.75 yards per game. He would have finished with 1,285 receiving yards. That would have been the third highest in program history. That's insane. And keep in mind, over the last month to month and a half of the year, he had led the nation in receiving yards per game. He would have had a really good chance to be a Biletnikoff finalist. Now, with Nick Nash, Travis Hunter, and Tedero McMillan leading the charge for that award, it would have been very difficult to usurp those three, but he would have absolutely been, at worst, number 4, which is an honorable mention, unfortunately. There's a ton of team statistics that I want to talk about. I do want to shout out Shema Mateer's 5 receiving touchdowns. I want to shout out Kyson Brown being the stud running back too he was, and I want to shout out the offensive line for surrendering fewer than 25 sacks. This team offensively, one of the best offensive units that the Sun Devils have seen in several years. And you're going to see, in their first year in the Big 12, they dominated all over the place. 429.4 offensive yards per game, passing and rushing. That was number 4 in the Big 12, fourth best. 199.9 rushing yards per game in the Big 12, fourth best in the conference. 30 rushing touchdowns, second most in the conference. 591 carries. That was the most in the Big 12, and that was the 7th most carries in the nation. ASU was one of the best running football programs in the Big 12, and they were also one of the better ones in the country. And they certainly had no problem giving Cam Skattebo the football, having Sam Leavitt run it, and giving Kyson Brown the ball a lot too as running back number 2. 32.9 points per game for the Sun Devils offense. Fourth best in the Big 12. 26 touchdown passes, fifth best in the Big 12. And keep in mind, there was 4 separate games where ASU did not have a touchdown pass. One of those, Sam Leavitt did not play. That is going to be very, very different in 2025. And you still managed to finish 5th. And if you get at least one more touchdown in each of those 4 games, that's 30. They were that close to 30 touchdown passes. Nonetheless, 8.4 passing yards per attempt was the second best in the conference. 13.7 yards per reception was third best in the Big 12 and 16th best in the nation. So that goes across receivers and tight ends and running backs. Anyone who caught the football, we were averaging almost 14 yards per reception. Not bad. 315 first downs. Third best in the Big 12 and 16th best in the nation. 46.2% conversion rate on third down. That was one of the biggest statistics of the season for the Sun Devils. Third in the Big 12, 15th in the nation. And unfortunately, this statistic is not a fun one. This was one of the few statistics that was not good, and that was 90 penalties for the Sun Devils, the third most in the Big 12. They're going to need to clean that up big time going into next year if they are going to continue the success that they had offensively this year. Let's go ahead and pick out a handful of stats that I would say defined the offense this season. Number 1, 199.9 rushing yards per game. It was the heart and soul of the Sun Devils attack this year. Cam Skattebo, one of the best running backs in the country, arguably the best running back in the country. He was absolutely dominant. He was special this year. Along with that 591 carries, which was 7th in the nation, most in the Big 12, that also defines the season for you because of how much they love to run the football and how much trust they placed in their guys. Next up, let's go with 13.7 yards per reception. That's pretty darn crazy. The craziest part is it still wasn't the highest in the Big 12, but it was within the top 20 in the nation. ASU aired it out this year. And considering how good their run game was, it's not a surprise that they were able to unlock the deep ball. But how many big receptions did Jordyn Tyson, Xavier Guillory, Melkon Stovall have this year? They were terrific for the Sun Devils. And then the last stat I would pick is, unfortunately, the 90 offensive penalties. They've just got to get better in that department. It was sometimes killing drives for the team, and it certainly took down momentum and some of the not motivation, what's the word that I'm trying to think of? Morale for the team. They need to get better in that department. I trust that they will. And then 2025 will hopefully be an even better season offensively for the Sun Devils. Defensively, this team was also pretty darn good. We're going to talk about the best stats of the 2024 season on the defensive side of the football and the statistics that defined the season for ASU's defense. Coming up next on the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I need to talk to you guys about our friends over at Talkspace, because therapy is a game changer and we all need a little bit of it. I know that I do. It can help manage your stress. It can help improve your sleep and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be challenging. Well, that's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours, 2 days. It's convenient. You have sessions from the comfort of your home. You can message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and most insured members have a chance for a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize your mental health. As a listener of this podcast, you're going to get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege. Enter the promo code SPACE80, SPACE80, to match yourself with a licensed therapist today. Go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege. Enter the promo code SPACE80 and get $80 off your first month. Show the support for the show. Again, that's Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege, promo code SPACE80. Thanks so much for tuning in to make Locked On Sun Devils your first listen of the day. A shout out to my everydayers who are here every day. Let's talk about the defensive side of the football for the Arizona State Sun Devils, led by Brian Ward. This team was once again a very, very, very good unit. They did a lot of things right this year. And we take a look at the way that they performed in 2023. And statistically, it was like, they're middle of the pack, lower, like, it didn't seem like the numbers reflected the way the defense played on the field in his first year. That changed in 2024. This defense that still maintained the same attitude and the same mantra that they had in year one with Brian Ward started turning out really, really productive categories for the team. There's a lot of really good ones. We'll start with total yards per game. Total yards per game allowed by this defense, 339.6 yards, the fifth best in the Big 12. 22.6 points per game allowed, third best in the Big 12. 112.9 rushing yards per game allowed. That was the best in the Big 12 and the 21st best in the nation. 3.7 yards per carry allowed. That was the third best in the Big 12. Let's stop there and take a look at those numbers. Total yards per game. They did a pretty good job this year. They snuffed out the run. They were one of the best run defenses in the country this past year. 21st against the run. Number one in the Big 12. They were terrific. You couldn't run on them. I don't think there's a better example than Texas. Texas, one of the better running teams in the country with Wisner and Blue. They didn't get 50 rushing yards combined from those two. They didn't get 50 rushing yards as a team in the Peach Bowl, in a college football playoff game where it was win or go home. And Texas, who runs the football really well, couldn't do it. They couldn't move the ball against this run defense. And there was so much that went right for this run defense because the interior of the defensive line just absolutely stuffed the line of scrimmage. 4 guys, none of them over 300 pounds, and yet they didn't get moved. The edge rushers played their role very well to set the edge. What a coincidence. The linebackers did a good job to keep everything behind the line of scrimmage. And of course, the safeties, especially Shamari Simmons, did such a good job as run support defenders. It was a complete effort from the front to the complete back end of the defense. And I thought that Javen Robinson and Keith Abney, your top 2 corners, also played the run pretty darn well. Brian Carrington, the defensive backs coach, had a lot of emphasis on making sure that his DBs knew how to stuff the run and that they were going to be willing participants. It didn't need to be all on the front 7. We saw that this year. We saw a complete effort from every single player in the defensive backfield come up and make plays against the run. Let's keep going. 16 interceptions, second most in the Big 12. Let's go back to the defensive backs for a second. A lot of guys got involved. Keith Abney and Javen Robinson each had 6 interceptions. Xavier Alford, 2 interceptions for himself. LT Welsh had 3 interceptions. He had a pick 6 on one of those as well. ASU just did a really good job coming off a season where they had 5 interceptions. Wrap your head around that for a second. 5 interceptions in 2023 as a team. That's not even 1 a game. They played 12 games. They were averaging less than 1 interception a game. And then this year it was over 1 per game. And there's a chance that they just continue to get better. Most of that team is back, and these younger corners are going to have better developed instincts. Miles Rouser didn't get a pick this year. That's going to change next year. I just don't see a scenario where he continues to not create turnovers. This was a great and very opportunistic team. 121.1 passer rating allowed. That was 6th best in the Big 12. And then finally, their sacks on the season. It's no secret that I am lower on this pass rush when it turns into converting pressures into takedowns and sacks. 24 on the year. Believe it or not, that was 6th best in the Big 12. That was like lower than middle of the pack in the country. ASU just has to get better when it comes to converting those pressures into sacks. And they've got the guys to do it. Clayton Smith, Elijah O'Neal, and Prince Dorbaugh, a healthy Prince Dorbaugh for 2025, mind you, should be able to hopefully double their totals. Some of that would be kind of shooting for the moon because you're asking for 9 sacks from Clayton and 8 sacks from Elijah, but you only had 3 sacks from Dorbaugh. He has had a 6-sack season before at ASU. I think he can get back to that. I think those 3 should be able to get 6 individually for themselves, and that's 18 sacks for ASU just from those 3. From there, you just develop everything else. But that is one of the defining stats of the year for me. Let's go ahead and pick the 3 most defining stats. Number 1, 112.9 rushing yards per game allowed. That was the bread and butter of this defense. You could not run the ball on them. They did a lot of things right defensively this year, but the one thing that they absolutely dominated was running the football. And keep in mind, in the Big 12, there was a handful of guys that had a 100-yard rushing performance against this defense. Like there was at least 6 or 7 guys just in the Big 12 who ran for over 100 yards. It could have been an even better run defense if they were able to clamp those guys for the entirety of 60 minutes. Like the biggest example for me was UCF and RJ Harvey, who was one of the best running backs in the Big 12 this past season. He was under 50 rushing yards. He might have been under 30 rushing yards in the first half. And then he exploded for well over 100 yards total for the game. He just went crazy in the second half. ASU had him dead to rights for most of the game, but unfortunately they just could not finish it. That run defense still nonetheless 21st best in the nation with a handful of 100-yard backs allowed. Number 2 most important stat is the 16 interceptions, the second most in the Big 12. That was just such a dramatic increase for the Sun Devils, a 200% increase for the team. You more than doubled your total, or tripled your total. 300% increase. Final answer. Mountain Ridge education at its finest. They just were so much better at taking control of the football and taking it from the offense is what I would prefer to say right there. They were phenomenal this year. And again, I think they're only going to continue to get better with these guys getting more comfortable and guys that are just continuing to develop into stars. The last stat for me is the 24 sacks. It was okay in the landscape of the conference, but it's got to be so much better in 2025. If ASU had been able to dial up sacks more consistently, I think you see this defense go from really, really great to borderline elite. There's work to be done. I got a lot of awards that I need to hand out, which includes game balls, which includes team awards, and the best plays of the year. Stick around. That's coming up next on the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let me talk to you about our friends over at Game Time Now, who have sponsored this episode. Attending a playoff game is an experience like no other. The energy, the excitement, the connection with other fans is unmatched. I remember the thrill of seeing my Sun Devils go to the Peach Bowl for the first time. It's a memory I'm never going to forget, and thankfully Game Time was able to help me save some money on that college football playoff game. This year, Game Time makes it even easier to create more unforgettable moments with their new feature, Game Time Picks. It's going to filter out the fluff. It shows you only the best deals on great seats, and you can focus on what matters the most, and that's being there. I use Game Time to get my tickets for the Sun Devils playoff game. Game Time Picks, more specifically, and it was super easy. I was able to find a super deal, speaking of which, that gave me an incredible value on the seats that I had for me, my dad, and the family that we went with. I could even preview the seats I had from the spot before buying and enjoyed my end zone spot. The all-in pricing is a game changer. There's no surprise fees at checkout, and knowing my tickets are backed by Game Time gives me peace of mind. They're terrific. It's on-time delivery. Their lowest price guarantee means that you're going to get 110% of your money back if you somehow find tickets in the same section and row for less. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. You guys are the absolute best for making the Locked On Sun Devils podcast your first listen of the day. A special shout out to my everydayers who are here every day. I've got game balls to hand out. I've got 3 for offense, 3 for defense, 1 for a certain member of the coaching staff. I've got team awards. And then, of course, we got to talk about the best plays of the year. Let's hand out those game balls. 3 on offense. You know who they're going to. Cam Skattebo, Sam Leavitt, Jordyn Tyson. Those were the guys that carried this team this year. Cam Skattebo, one of the finest performances of any position in the history of the program. Carried you, no pun intended, to a college football playoff berth, your first ever, and kept you in that game. First half, you were right there. You were playing tough. Second half, took them to overtime, and it's because of everything Cam Skattebo did, from rushing touchdowns to passing touchdowns and to 2-point conversions. He did it all. Sam Leavitt, one of the best freshman seasons we have ever seen at the quarterback spot, and one of the better freshman seasons from the offensive side of the football. Sky's the limit for this kid. Jordyn Tyson, first 1,000-yard season in 5 years. Could have been even better. As long as he stays healthy this upcoming year, he is a Fred Biletnikoff Award finalist. Defense, 3 more to hand out. CJ Fight on the defensive line, Caleb McCullough at linebacker, Xavier Alford at safety. CJ Fight, was the force from the interior against the run game. He started almost every game as a freshman. He started every game this year. He was able to bring the quarterback down. He had an awesome scoop and score touchdown. More on that in a minute. And was just a force, man. He truly developed from a quality player to a good player. And going into his junior year, I have some high hopes for him. Caleb McCullough needs to be remembered by Sun Devil fans. He needs to have a special attachment to the fans. Someone who stuck it out with this program for 3 years, not getting on the field. Stuck it out when Kenny Dillingham came in and said, look, man, we're building something. I want you to stay. And he stayed. And then he stayed again for his final season and was arguably the best linebacker that this team had. He had 2 interceptions against Utah. Again, more on that coming up. He was special. I hope that people remember him for a very long time. And then Xavier Alford goes 1,000 days without taking a snap on the football field. Goes on to be first team all Big 12 conference. He was amazing. He was spectacular. The best is yet to come for a guy who had been off the field for so long. He's going to be returning, already coming off such a great year when he hadn't seen the football field. Keep an eye out on him. Coaching award, or not award, coaching game ball. This was really tough, man. It could have been Kenny. It could have been Brian Ward. I opted to go with offensive coordinator Marcus Arroyo. This team completely turned around under his watch. The offense was not great in 2023. The offense this year, I wouldn't call it legendary, but man, it was pretty darn close to being legendary. What a special year that Marcus Arroyo put together, as Cam Skattebo was one of the best players in the country. Sam Leavitt was one of the best freshmen in the country, and the entirety of the unit was able to get ASU competing in every single game this year, and they won 11 games for the first time in a minute. Team awards we're going to hand out. I got Offensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, Assistant Coach of the Year, Coach of the Year, Position Coach of the Year, Best Play of the Year, and of course the MVP. And we'll go ahead and start with the MVP. Drum roll, please. It is Cam Skattebo, the People's running back. Had a Heisman Trophy contending season. Finished 5th, didn't get invited to New York, which is shenanigans. Should have been 3rd behind Genty and behind the winner, Travis Hunter. I still think he had a legitimate chance to really earn way more first place votes than he did. Absolutely the MVP of this team. Offensive Player of the Year, as much as I want to give it to someone else, I don't know how I could not give it to Cam Skattebo, who set program records over 100 years in this program. Oh, well over 100 years, 120 plus years. And Cam Skattebo set some major records for the Sun Devils this year. Phenomenal. Absolutely Offensive Player of the Year. Defensive Player of the Year. There was a lot of choices. I decided to go with Xavier Alford, the first team All Big 12 member, 2nd in tackles, 2 interceptions this year. And I truly do think that he's only going to get better. Reminder, he missed 1,000 consecutive days of not being on the field. And his first chance he got back, first team all conference? Yeah, no doubt, Defensive Player of the Year. Assistant Coach of the Year, again, I'm handing it out to Marcus Arroyo. Brian Ward, very difficult not to give it to him, but look at what the offense did. Positional Coach of the Year, we're going to go with Brian Carrington, who was able to get the most out of this defensive backs group. Like I said, those guys were physical against the run, and they created a lot of turnovers. Hines Ward definitely deserves a lot of credit as well for working with the receivers and getting them to buy into his coaching with some limited time, because Rashad Samples left in the spring for a job opportunity with Oregon. Hines Ward steps in, and they pick up that mentality. Best play of the year. I've picked out 10 plays for you. I have my number 1 play and a runner-up, which it was really difficult to separate those two. I'd almost go 1A, 1B, and then I got 8 others I want to throw out there as well. All right, let's go ahead and start with the best play of the year. Drum roll again. It is Cam Skattebo's 42-yard touchdown pass to Malik McClain against Texas in the Peach Bowl. That was the game that ASU needed to make a statement this year, that they are a competitor and that they can play with the best of the best. And guess what? They proved it. But they proved it by their second half resurgence, and they proved it by showing that they're ready for this next level. It was a special season for the Sun Devils team, and they needed a heck of a comeback against Texas to prove it. And no play in that game just made that point, man. None more than Cam Skattebo's 42-yard touchdown on Malik McLean. It was just the emphasis of why we call him the people's running back on this show, because he can pass it. It was a game-changing play for the Sun Devils. Runner-up, this was the runaway award before that Skattebo play. That was Javen Robinson's 64-yard interception against BYU that saved the season. BYU was going down the field. They were potentially going to take a lead over the Sun Devils, which would have placed them in a very difficult situation to try and win the Big 12. And Javen Robinson gets a pick off of Jake Retzlaff. He takes it 64 yards. He barely was stopped from taking that thing to the house. But you listen to both calls, the announcer call on ESPN and the radio call from Tim Healy. Both of them said the same thing. That play saved the season. Cannot be overstated. Honorable mentions. Got to do a top 10 for you guys. Let's run through in no particular order. I did this chronologically, but you can put them in whatever you want. Canyon Floyd's 32-yard pass to Blazin' Lano Long on a fake punt in the Peach Bowl against Texas. No one saw that coming. Not a single person. And Kenny Dillingham with cojones the size of Randy Marsh in South Park. Holy cow, man. I couldn't believe it. And again, like Cam Skattebo's 42-yard touchdown pass, that was ASU saying, we're not going down without a fight, and we're here to show you and show the world that we are serious, and you need to pay attention. Next up, Derek Eusebio's 64-yard touchdown reception against Arizona. The game was out of hand, but that was Eusebio's first reception of his career, and it was Trenton Bourguet's first completion of the season. In his final year of eligibility for the Sun Devils, it was a special moment. It was a heartwarming moment for Bourguet's first completion to be a 64-yard touchdown and Eusebio's first reception of his college football career to go for a 64-yard touchdown. Very, very special. Next up, Cam Skattebo against Cincinnati sent their defenders to the shadow realm on a 1-yard score. He said, move, get out the way. You can fill in the blank on what that other word was. Oh my goodness. When I saw that play, I couldn't believe it. They ran it to the outside, and I'm like, what are you doing? Like, shortest distance is north and south. And as he's getting there, there's 3 Cincinnati defenders. He makes 2 of them miss, and the third guy, he puts his shoulder down, boom, plants him in the dirt. Also want to talk about Skattebo defying physics on a 50-yard touchdown run against Utah. He looked like he was going to be dead to rights and stumble, and all of a sudden he puts a hand down, he pushes himself up, and just scatters his way into the end zone. It was incredible. You're sitting there, you're like, there's no way that I just saw what I just saw, and yet I did. Next up, Caleb McCullough with game-sealing interception against Utah. Same game where ASU was able to storm the field. This was the breakout game for Caleb McCullough. This was the game that needed to put him on the map forever for the Sun Devils. It was a huge, important win. Utah was ranked at the time. Yeah, they ended up not being good. But that was a huge, important get-back game for the Sun Devils. Caleb McCullough won it for them. 3 more plays. Cameron Skattebo, 39-yard run against Mississippi State, and selflessly decides to slide inbounds, milk the clock, and hits them with this little pose. You can see it on YouTube. If you can't see it, you can find it in your GIFs pretty much wherever, Twitter, wherever else. It was a special play where he easily could have scored. Keep in mind, he ran for 262 yards in that game, second most in a single game. He didn't score in that game. Somehow could have scored right there and decided not to. Special player. 2 more plays. CJ Fight with the dancing bear scoop and score against Mississippi State. It was so fun to see that big man grab that ball and just ballerina dance his way into the end zone. It was so much fun. And the final play that is one of the plays of the year is Zyrus Fiaseu's pick six against Wyoming. It was the first snap of the year. Offense, defense, whatever. First play of the 2024 season was a pick six by Zyrus Fiaseu, and it got everybody to look and go, things might be changing in Tempe. Lo and behold, they were. Those are the stats, offensive and defensively, that define the season. Those are my major awards that I had to hand out. What did you guys think? What did I miss on? What statistics stood out to you? What was your play of the year, and who was your MVP? Let me know in the comments. You can hit me up on Twitter at RichieBrats36 or the podcast at LO_Sun Devils. Wherever you're getting your shows, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. You'll get the update whenever we post new content. I appreciate each and every single one of you for tuning in and making Locked On Sun Devils your first listen of the day. A shout out to my everydayers who are here every day. We'll be back again tomorrow. We got lots to talk about. I've got something in the works. Stay tuned for that. I don't have a specific date yet for what I'm working on, but that just means that you should hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you do get that update when this big thing does happen for us. Again, I appreciate you guys. Now's never been a better time to subscribe to the show, and I'll catch you later. Till then, you keep it locked right here on Locked On Sun Devils.